Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome along to the Championship Podcast EFL debate. No Ollie man from Sheffield United way to co-host with me this evening, but I'm joined by a plethora of guests, of course, starting with Annie Harish, the Bristol City supporter from AH Robins Talk. Good evening to you, Annie. Thanks for joining us. 4 points from Liam Manning's first 4 games in charge. A couple of encouraging performances in there. Mildly optimistic on that evidence?
Mildly, I'd say yes. On the basis of the evidence so far, as you mentioned, Gab, obviously 4 points from 4 games is kind of not ideal in terms of a table form. It's more towards the bottom, more kind of just about safety form, and I'd say we're looking to be a bit higher than that. Hopefully, hopefully that's the general consensus in the Championship anyway. So yeah, in that points return, just on the face value of it, not the most ideal start, but I would point towards, Middlesbrough at home and Southampton away is not easy games, and QPR now is not an easy game either, especially at Loftus Road. And the late defeat, if you want to caveat that, against Norwich, where we probably possibly should have been the ones that scored the winner. Anyway, so yeah, mildly optimistic. I think we're hopefully other City fans can see it as well. We're trying to build into a clear pattern of play. It's very clear to see whenever we have the ball, we try and keep it, and we try and make a through at the back shape. And when we're out of possession, it's very clear we go to back 4. And that's, I think that's hopefully that's evident for us to see, and for the City fans to be, working with, and looking at it, going, okay, we're trying to do something. It will take a bit of time to come off, and that is the case with anything in life. You're not going to just throw in. If you start something new, it's not going to take. It's not going to start straight away. It's going to take a bit of time. And yeah, that's just how it is. The nature of the defeats have been a bit hard to take. It's a bit of a bitter pill, because we were really good against Southampton in the first half. And as I said, we possibly should have been the ones that should have scored that winner.
Had a good counter-attack against them in the first half, thrown from a set piece, I think, as well, didn't you?
Yeah, and we had one cleared off the line from a brilliant bit of goalkeeping from Bazunu. So if we are 1-0 up at half time at Southampton, you never know. You could, you look at maybe getting something there, which is always a positive. So I'd say generally, from my perspective, I'd say it's quite varying, and it's a great range of emotions from a Bristol City fan's perspective. You took a lot of opinions, but from my perspective, I'm liking the things I'm saying and the clear progression in terms of what we're trying to do, and that's the main bit.
Talk to me, Annie, a little bit about the tactical intelligence required of George Tanner and Cam Pring to sort of facilitate that switch from a back 3 in possession to a back 4 out of possession, because I imagine it takes something mentally to be able to adjust to those different remits.
No, it's weird you mentioned that, because against Middlesbrough, which was Manning's first home game, it was George Tanner who tapped in to make a back 3. And it was Zach Viner and Rob Dickie. And it was very clear that we tried to get the ball to Cam Pring down the left-hand side, overload that left-hand side, and potentially cause, I think there's Isaiah Jones from Middlesbrough, a few problems. And it was clear that we targeted that area. And to be fair, to a certain extent, it did work, because once Middlesbrough overloaded that area and trying to protect Isaiah Jones, that allowed Mark Sykes, and whenever Taylor Garden-Hickman tried to get forward, that allowed space down our right-hand side. And that got us the penalty, and that got us that got us our third goal potentially as well. So that worked. And against Norwich, it was Cameron Pring who tucked in at left centre back to make it back 3 with Viner and Dickie, and George Tanner tried to move forward. The only problem is, I don't think George Tanner's the best at going forward, to be honest, and I don't think he has the decisiveness and the instinct in him to not only just put a ball in, just put any sort of quality in it into that area, which I think Cameron Pring does. I think that's the reason we really, really hurt Middlesbrough really quickly. And unfortunately, what happened against Norwich was we got caught on the counter attack, because George Tanner, again, there's no slant on him, got caught out a little bit down our right hand side. So we've tried a few different things already. I suppose it's something that we assessed rather vigorously, and hopefully we land on something that we're going to stick with over the longer term instead of kind of constantly changing, even if it's minor details in terms of who goes forward, who goes where. Hopefully we stick on something, and if that's going to work, that's ultimately the formula for success, hopefully, for Manning and this current squad he has at his disposal.
Sure. I'm really interested in whether you feel like you might actually want to recruit for a right wing back, because I suppose there is the option of switching Mark Sykes there. I know he played, what would it be, left wing back against Norwich, and I actually thought he forged quite a nice relationship with Jason Knight, but there is the option, I suppose, of moving Campering to left wing back, or possibly switching things around, maybe.
I honestly wouldn't really think of putting Mark Sykes in a more defensive-minded position, because we do get caught out. Mark Sykes has pace, but I'm not sure he's possibly the best at tracking back and knowing his positions going back. Unless we have injuries.
I wasn't necessarily saying a more defensive position. I was saying on the other side. So because he was left wing back right against Norwich, I was thinking, could he play right wing back instead of Tanner?
Could he play right? I suppose that's kind of what Manning wants from his right wing back, and again, who he plays in terms of who he wants to move forward in that particular game. As I said, we switched up, didn't we? And if it's going to be the right wing back going forward, potentially Mark Sykes is at the moment better option than George Tanner. If we are going to push the right wing back forward instead of the left wing back, I thought Sykes wasn't as effective. I think that's been the case. Even under Pearson, I don't think he has been as effective at wing back, just in general, even at left wing back. I think he played there, might have been against Cardiff, and he was just totally nullified.
Do you know what, though, Annie? I'd be really curious to get your feelings on this. Mark Sykes, my feeling on Mark Sykes is that you're not going to get the best out of him if you ask him to conjure something up out of nothing, sort of individualistically. Like, I think his main strength is his movement and his willingness to sometimes go away from the general direction of play in order to create space for other players. So you tend to see the best of Mark Sykes, in my opinion, in partnerships, in relationships, combinations, rather than actually him being the go-to man. So for me, the big thing is, what's he got around him?
No, that's right. I'd also argue this. I think if for those relationships to happen, I think this group of players might need a bit more time to first not only get used to the players around them, but also get used to the system, because there's a complete sea change, and I don't think really we understood how much of a sea change it was going to be, because we always felt, we were high pressing, we must be a forward positive thinking team under Pearson, but actually has been quite a drastic change. Sure. So I think maybe this is going to take longer than it possibly we anticipated. So for those relationships you talk about to conjure up, I think it's going to take, as I said, the players getting used to the system quite well, and that might not be with the players who are here at the moment. That might be with players who come in January, in the summer, and if hopefully that's the case, because I think whatever happens over these next two transfer windows, I think Mark Sykes is still inevitably going to be in the team, because he is possibly one of our best players, and definitely one of our better attacking threats. So if I was Liam Manning right now, I'd honestly just focus on getting the players in the system, working them in, getting final details across, and hope the players get that on board, even Mark Sykes as well, and then hopefully, like he inevitably would have done at Oxford, those player relationships start to formulate as that happens, simultaneously, instead of one happening after the other. So I think it's a case of the foundations to be built, and then that will just layer on top of it, I think.
Can you, Annie, sure, just on those foundations then, Annie, who would be those? You described Mark Sykes as one of Bristol City's main attacking threats. Who would you describe the key players that Liam Manning will be looking at right now and saying, yes, I can build around you lot?
Well, Mark Sykes would be one of them because I know I said possibly not as effective in different positions as right wing, because I think he's more effective there. But he's very versatile as well if needs be. Jason Knight is going to be one of them because he's I think I've said this a million times about Jason Knight. He's a Duracell bunny. He just doesn't stop running.
Pressing monster, isn't he? Yeah.
He could literally be our pressing trigger from central defensive midfield, and I wouldn't be surprised. He's that he just doesn't stop running.
I thought his link-up play against Norwich was quite good as well. Like, he showed some nice touches too. So hopefully, if he can add a bit more of that side to his game, I think you've got quite a prospect. Because he broke into Derby's team really young, so he's still got time on his side.
Yeah, and he got forward a lot more, which I was encouraged by. And I think ultimately, there are some concerns over his goal scoring record and his kind of ability to make play in the final third. Ultimately, that's only going to happen if he's deployed in those higher positions. So hopefully, if Manning is going to put him, or rely on him to get goals and assists from midfield, hopefully Jason Knight is one of them. Other one is Zach Viner, centre back. Whether he's here next summer, if he continues this, really good patch of, well, it's not a purple patch anymore. He's just a really good player. Yeah. And if he continues this, I'm sure there'll be a lot of interest in him in the summer.
What's Matty James's form been like?
Matty James, it's weird because under Pearson he was really good, and he could tell that, and he was experienced, and was comfortable in the system. And I think he's also, despite his age, I think he's also going to take some time to get used to the system. And I think there are a lot of aspects to his game that suit the system. I think his ability to switch play from left to right really quickly is really, really impressive. And his ability to pick up positions, between our defence and our midfield, and to kind of spot runs is really good. Maybe sometimes the execution of the pass is not quite there. That's why he's playing in the Championship. If he could do that on a regular basis, he'd be in the Premier League. But the kind of awareness of he can do that, and the quality is he can do that is really good. So Matty James possibly, but his age might be a factor. And maybe Manning might look at someone a bit more dynamic to alongside Matty James. And possibly the last one is maybe Taylor Gardner-Hickman. And he's under Pearson he was really good. I suppose under Pearson he didn't really have much time to get into the team and make it make a first team spot. But under Manning he's been superb. Even if you ignore that goal against Middlesbrough, just performance-wise, he's been just really, really good. Against Norwich, I'd argue he was possibly our best player. I know Jason Knight and Mark Sykes did really well as well, but I thought Gardner-Hickman showed some brilliant touches, got around some players, technical quality is on another level, and he just. Did you watch the Luton v Arsenal game yesterday, Gab?
Premier League, mate. Not fast
but
about that.
For anyone who did watch it, that Ross Barkley performance for Luton, very similar. Just ability to get round a couple of players with ease, turn, has the awareness, has a spatial awareness, gives a pass if necessary. Taylor Gardner-Hickman can do all of that, and he does that with ease, really. So hopefully that permanent that buy clause is activated very soon, because I'd get very nervous if that wasn't. And I'd say those players: Gardner-Hickman, Viner, Mark Sykes, possibly one of them.
Those are the ones. Brilliant stuff. Annie, thanks so much for your time. Keep up the great work on the channel, and hopefully catch up with you later in the season, bud.
Yeah, cheers, Gab.
Nice one, mate. I'm delighted to bring in our next guest, Lewis from the Wednesday Till I Die podcast. Good evening, Lewis. How are you?
Good, thank you, Gabe. How are yourself?
Yeah, really well, thanks. It's interesting because I've sort of talked myself into Sheffield Wednesday being a little bit resurgent under Danny Röhl, and certainly performance-wise, there's definitely a case for that. But I suppose there's also part of me that looks at the table and sees you're still 10 points off of safety, because even even under Röhl, you've kind of been on the wrong side of firm margins, which is definitely a massive step up from what we've seen before. But I guess it just shows how important those 4 points against Leicester and Blackburn were.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest. Since Danny Röhl's come in, and it, like you say, it might sound daft to the outside world to even speak like this, but there's probably only been one game, the Millwall game at home, where I thought we didn't deserve anything. We've been fantastic. We've been creating chances. Like you said, that team was dead and buried under Xisco, and they've had a real resurgence. You know, they're pressing teams. We look settled. We look more confident. You know, we do still have obviously a problem at the back. We're quite fragile. Once we concede one, we're usually going to concede again. And the amount of chances we were missing prior to Saturday was very concerning. But hey, we might have found the answer in Kadar. Who knows?
Well, let's talk about Bailey Kadar, because Lewis, obviously there's it's probably quite well documented by now, the fact that his father, Danny Kadar, and Dean Windass played together at Bradford City, and now their sons are doing it for Sheffield Wednesday, which is a lovely story. But I suppose it just shows that Danny Röhl's able to pick a player like Bailey out from the academy and he's able to make an instant impact.
Yeah, and I think, to be fair, even myself, a lot of people were, because he's obviously been scoring quite well in the under-21s, etc. And people were calling for him, and I'm a bit cautious about chucking unproven
especially
kids
for starts in the league. It's a lot of pressure, isn't it?
Yeah, and if it's miserable every week like it was, and we were losing every week, can't do the confidence much good. But no, he seems to, you know, he's worked obviously at sort of development levels at Bayern Munich, and was it Leipzig he was at as well, and he just seems to know how to pick them. What I do like about what Röhl has done is we've had managers in the past, such as Gary Monk, Xisco, where they don't like a player, they freeze them out, they make them go and train on their own, all that rubbish. Röhl clearly has his favourites, and he has people that he wants, but it's an open door. Like Liam Palmer was out of the team. He come back in at the weekend. All right, might have made a mistake for the goal, but, you know, I'm not going to hold it too much against him. He has levels that he expects, and if you reach them, the door's always open, and he seems a really sort of likeable and energising manager in that respect.
Yeah, I think in Germany they have they seem to have a philosophy a little bit with managers, and certainly with players, where, you know, if you're showing enough potential then actually the age doesn't concern managers as much as maybe it does perhaps in this country, which I think is really interesting, although I do think that's changing a little bit. But I just want to talk about I looked at some of the performances earlier in the season, and I saw Barry Bannon playing as a number 10, and against the ball, he just looked, certainly under Munoz, he just looked sort of motionless. He looked sort of lost. And then I watched the extended highlights of the game against Blackburn, and he was snapping into challenges. He was, you know, running around. He was supporting the press, and I don't know whether it's a man management thing, whether it's the tactics and the style is sort of enthusing him, but it feels like he's pressed a few buttons with certainly with Bannon and probably with the whole squad.
I think with a lot of them, and I think, like you say, you're right. For earlier on in the season, when I was Barry Bannon now 33, 34, and he's trying to play him as a number 10 for the first time. It was a nonsense, and I don't think half of the team knew what their roles were supposed to be. And I love how now, the whole of last season, we had the first three names on the team sheet was Will Vaulks, George Byers, and Barry Bannon. And, you know, now that holy trinity, to pinch a Manchester United phrase, are now the middle three. And lo and behold, they know what they're doing. They're complementing each other. You know, Byers is getting back to his best. Vaulks, who was maligned a lot at the start of the season, he made a few mistakes. One at Cardiff sticks out.
We seem to have lost Lewis.
Sorry.
Was it something I said?
Sorry. I thought I could use the works Wi-Fi, but unfortunately it's off my mobile data. But yeah, Vaulks has come back in. He's doing a great job. And Bannon, I think as Wednesday fans, we do take him for granted. Bannon's just Bannon. He's got all the energy in the world, and when he's got someone doing the dirty work for him, he can really spread a Hollywood ball about.
Certainly can. It's interesting you mentioned Byers there, because I actually went up to Hillsborough for the Ipswich game in September, and I thought actually in the second half of that game, George Byers, you could see what Byers might be able to do in sort of a better coach side. And I'm just wondering, now that you've mentioned he's coming into form, are we going to see a bit more of why he was regarded as such an important player in League One last season?
Yeah, I think we are, and I certainly hope so. I'm a number one member of the George Byers fan club over here. I love the guy. Yeah, that's it. I'll get some badges made up. But no, he's brilliant, and I think, like I say, it's when he's been in and out of the team, he needs to make sure his fitness is up to scratch. And I think you're seeing the confidence building in everyone, but particularly George. And obviously, he scored at Birmingham. Not the best performance all round from the team, but hopefully he can start chipping in with the goals again and doing what he does.
Certainly. Let's talk about Bambo Diaby, Lewis. I mean, sounds like it was an outstanding performance from him on Saturday, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I had to eat a bit of humble pie because I've criticised him from day one. He's not been great, but he was a man mountain on Saturday, and I think obviously with Iofa went off after like 30 seconds or whatever it was, he really stepped up to the plate. I think obviously Danny Röhl likes playing it out from the back, and I don't think it was possibly his strength. The ball kept going to him, and he's more of a, not to be too simple about it, he's a head it, kick it defender. Sure. And obviously we've took that pressure off him this weekend, and he's shown us, why he's been in the Championship for as long as he has. So long may it continue. And if I'm going to an evening with Barry Bannon next year, if I see Bambo, if he carries this on, I'll go and apologise to him in person for being so mean on the podcast.
Fair play. In terms of Wednesday's survival prospects, the way you're talking, Lewis, you must feel like, given that it's only December, and although 10 points is a big gap, it's not insurmountable just at this stage. Do you feel like you've given yourselves a smidgen of hope?
Yeah. My head still says that we'll be relegated because I think we've given ourselves such a mountain. One benefit we do have is that the bottom 5, 6, even 7 of the Championship aren't great either, and everyone's beating each other. I think it's got to be one game at a time, as cliched as it is to say. It can't be right. We're 10 points off it. We've got to go right. We're 3 points off Rotherham in 23rd. Let's get above them. Then let's get above. I'm not sure who's 22nd, but just keep building and building.
I'm pretty confident you'll get above Rotherham probably between now and Christmas, because I think Rotherham seem to find it really difficult to attract a manager at the moment. So, I would kind of think based on your performances under Röhl, you'll be able to achieve that and beating them as well. I think it's still going to be a big ask. Do you reckon there will be some money available in January if you need it?
Who knows? We missed the chance here. He's, we're telling us a few weeks ago he's not going to put any more money in, and then it was leaked in the press midweek that he wants to bring in a £30,000 striker, £30,000 a week. That is not a £30,000 transfer fee. And now season tickets are on sale this week as well. So who knows? We will see. I wouldn't be surprised if we gave it a go, especially with the TV money changing so drastically from next season. And I think we've got some. To be fair to Transfer, to be fair to the manager, we are onto something quite special with him, and it would be a real shame if we were to drop out, because for all the goodwill in the world, I don't think he'd manage in the third tier of English football. If we can scrape up and see what can happen, if any miracles can be performed next season, who knows? But definitely some business to be done in January, I think, to give ourselves a real chance.
Quick word on the ownership. You mentioned Mr. Chansiri there, Lewis. I suppose naturally when results or performances are picking up a little bit, the ownership situation goes onto the back burner a little bit more than it would do, in those points of crisis, I suppose. But is there going to be a takeover at some point, do you think, or are you? What do you think the future is going to hold? Because it feels like, as much as there is some encouragement at Wednesday based on the recent turnaround in performances, the rot of the club is still there, and that's kind of what needs to change, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's really hard to say. I mean, how much for certain we don't know. Apparently, this past 2 weeks there was somebody involved in the NFL wanted to take over, and apparently the fee that was being asked was over £200 million for the club, and Chancery wanted to maintain a stake in it as well.
He's not just asking for 200 million. It's not like, that's not the point where you'd say, I'm asking for 200 million here. Maybe I'll give you the 100%.
Exactly. So who knows how that man's mind works? I mean, that's all rumour and innuendo. Obviously, we're not privy to anything that's come from the 1867 group, where the protest group set up. Who knows? I mean, at the minute, it seems like we will lumber from one disaster to the other, and he doesn't seem to want to learn anything. When you've got an ownership like that, all you can hope for is that you catch lightning in a bottle on the pitch and you fail upwards. And I think we've got half a chance in that in Danny Röhl. It's just a shame, obviously. I believe he was interviewed in the summer. I think we would have been a different beast this season if he'd have come in and brought his own players in. But, that's the sliding doors moments.
Absolutely. Butterfly effect. Lewis, thanks so much for talking to us. Love your stuff on the Wednesday Till I Die podcast. So thanks for joining us, and hopefully catch up with you later in the season, mate.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. Take care.
Cheers. So our next guest, it was pre-recorded. So this was our conversation with Luke from SwansCast earlier, and the connection wasn't great, but we persevered. So have a look at this. So we're joined by Luke from the SwansCast podcast on Swansea City. A bit of a time delay on this one, but we'll persevere. Luke, I just wanted to get your reaction to the news that the club has parted company with manager Michael Duff.
It's a tricky, because I think most of the debate probably in the situation it's been kind. But I do a little bit sorry for him. He hasn't got the results. That's the bottom line. It's a results-based business, and he isn't performing. And we are, we kind of getting closer to the relegation zone in the league. So anyone looking over their shoulder, you do start to worry, especially following on from Russell Martin's style. I think there was a big difference in what was seen on the pitch. So in terms of buying yourself time, it's been a little bit of a struggle, because what is being seen on the pitch is perhaps such contrast to what we're used to last season. I think it was a bit of a no-win situation, potentially taken over from Martin. And the other thing he hasn't helped himself with is probably some of the comments he made in the media around the derby match and against Cardiff. Really didn't sit well with a lot of the fans, and I think a lot of people couldn't forgive him for that. So results was the only way he was going to kind of win that back around. And as much as it did get better for a brief period, it's fallen off again. And it's hard to say really where we're going to turn it around under what he was trying to do. A bit of sympathy with the injury situation we have at the club and that sort of thing. But I think the bottom line is he hasn't really shored up the defence, which was the priority. And if you look at the stats, we've actually scored more goals than any other manager in the Championship seasons in their first 19 games for Swansea since we got relegated, essentially. But he's also conceded the most amount. So that probably tells the story and why we are where we are in the league. And I think that's what the issue is underlying, really. And he got back in the summer, and I guess not really getting the results is the reason why he's ended up being shown the door.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when I look at his jobs at previous clubs, it has been built on sort of defensive solidity and a lot of sort of consistency in a back three, and he hasn't been able to find that at Swansea. So I wanted Luke to move it forward towards what the club needs from this next appointment. I'd imagine the number one priority will be to go back to quote unquote the Swansea way, if you like.
Yeah, so there's obviously been a statement from the club and Andy Coleman, the chairman, who, he's quite relatively new himself. He's only been here within a year. He's still learning, if you like. One of the reasons he has been brought into the position that he's in, he's brought into club investment, all that sort of thing. but he's made a point of saying how he's moved here with his family because he is American, same as our owners. There's been a bit of a disconnect with Swansea and the owners in the past couple of seasons. So he's been brought in to be more ground level. He's come to Swansea. He's running it from Swansea rather than the owners above him who never really show face, if you like. And in his statement, he made a point of saying in the months since he made the original appointment of Duff, he's got further understanding of how important that style of Swansea Way is. Maybe he didn't quite grasp that when the appointment was made and how important that would be, although he was kind of made to think that Duff would be able to do that to a certain extent. I think maybe there are some differences to Duff's mentality and what fans here want to see. But he said that's a big thing in the next decision making, that he's going to learn from this period to take into the next one. So I would imagine when they look for a new manager, that will be something that they are focusing on, because otherwise it's not really in line with what they've said now as well in the statement with the sacking. So I would expect somebody coming in that's going to at least try to play. Might not be, the extreme level that Russell Martin played, because I think he adopted the most extreme version of it that I ever saw since it's been a thing. And that's including managers like Michael Loud, Brendan Rodgers and Roberto Martinez. I think Martin's approach is even more another level possession dominant than any of those managers. But I think it needs to be a little bit more akin to that style or any of the styles I just mentioned from those previous managers than what we've really been seeing this season so far.
Luke there speaking from SwansCast Media. Go check out the podcast earlier. They've just released a full podcast reacting to the news of Michael Duff's departure and talking about what's next for Swansea City. Delighted to be joined in the meantime by Jonny Lambert from the Wise Men Say podcast on Sunderland. Good evening to you, John. How are you?
Good evening, Gabe. Good, thanks, mate. Never a dull moment at Sunderland, so we're kind of used to all this.
I suppose I wanted to talk about that really, John, because the news of Tony Mowbray's departure, I feel like there's maybe a perception element at play with Tony Mowbray because he is this sort of wise and experienced manager. And actually, when he was first appointed, I was expecting the club to go maybe for a more exotic choice, which it looks like the club is going to go for this time. At the same time, I look at Sunderland 10th at a stage where they're investing a lot in terms of long-term potential assets rather than players that you can be confident are going to deliver right here, right now, although you have got a few of those. And I also feel in sort of 14 of the 19 games, you've got a sort of chance creation level that's probably superior to the opponents, which suggests you maybe weren't too far away. So on balance, how are you feeling about the decision as a Sunderland fan?
Yeah, it's a strange one because when people, a lot of the fellow fans that I engage with were kind of shocked at the departure, but also not surprised. And I think that really sums things up. It sums how, in terms of XG for and against, we kind of dominate those stats in the division, but ultimately we haven't been getting those kind of the fruits of those efforts. And that ultimately that comes down to the lack of proven striker. And that's something that Tony Mowbray was very critical of after the recent game against Millwall, where you can tell he's crying out for a seasoned, experienced striker. And he's been dealt with certainly 3 teenagers who aren't ready yet, one on loan, and Rusin, who's a bit more further along the line, but he's very physically very small. He's more of a wide forward, and as a result, he hasn't really got what he needs when he's showcasing every week the best 2 wingers arguably in the division in Patrick Roberts and Jack Clark. So it's been a bit of mixed emotions really, because we've become a little bit predictable off the back of not being able to get the ball in the net. And there's a lot of canny sides in the Championship that work you out after a while. And I think that's possibly what's happened with Tony and why the club have made this decision.
Sure. I think it feels to me, John, like there's an element of the club wanting to have its cake and eat it a little bit, because the reason that it's invested in not so much Burstow because he's on loan, but Elisa Mienda, in possibly to an extent Rushin, although he is 26, in Lewis Semedo, rather than signing maybe a Ross Stewart replacement, someone that you can be confident to right here, right now, step in. And yet at the same time, it seems like the club has approached this season with quite lofty expectations, because I think it said they've targeted the top two, or said finishing outside the top six would be a disappointment, which it feels to me like there's a little bit of an inconsistency there between, if you're going to try and invest in young talents and develop players, that's one thing, but then you've got to make some allowances for the short-term performance on the pitch. Or you say, we are going to hold you to high standards, but we're going to back you to bring in proven players who can deliver right here, right now.
Yeah, I think the answer is kind of twofold to this. The first thing is that we overachieved last season. We came through League One via the playoffs, we scraped into the playoffs, and we got up through Alex Neil. And then when Alex Neil departed for various reasons that have been discussed numerous times amongst the fan base and the wider division, it was stability and just maintaining championship status last year should have been the very first objective. Of course, because the standard of the division was pretty poor last year, and we were able to get into the playoffs with, what was it, 69 points. Preston, Blackburn and the likes fell off a cliff in terms of their form. Sure. But for a few injury problems that we had, we should have turned Luton over and potentially had a final and been a game away from the Premier League. And then you're into a whole different conversation. So there's the overachievement element of it, which is quite significant. I think then you've got what the club are very much aligned to this 5-year plan. They do have this long-term vision. They do want to not pay a fee for anyone over the age of 25. Therefore, that they're bringing in youngsters. The problem is they're not bringing in 21, 22-year-olds, bringing in 17-year-olds, 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds. Kids, even you take the likes of Pierre Ekwa, who came in. He's done fantastic for us, really, but he's still only got 20, 30 games experience in his whole career. Joe Bellingham's a bit of a freak of nature in that he's so much more developed, and he's been able to cope with playing lots of games as well as age group games for England. Although we are starting to see signs of a bit of fatigue there. So Mowbray's hand was forced to play this young side. Whether he had full autonomy over selection remains to be seen.
Unlikely, I would suggest, given the strikers.
Yeah, and also if the objective was, like you say, the top two or certainly minimum playoffs, there's a lot of discussion. Oh, well, how's he been sat? We're only 3 points off the playoffs. I mean, the Championship, pretty much half the division are always 3 points off the playoff, as it's such a wide open division. Realistically, the number you need to look at is 18 points off Ipswich in second. Now, that is a hell of a lot of points to catch up. So if automatic is the objective, which I don't think it is, I think the club are happy to keep building, profiting.
I'm pretty sure. I'm not certain about this, but I'm pretty sure I've talked to Sunderland fans who have said that top two was the target, whether it was the expectation or not. But I think it was something along
certainly
those
my
lines.
expectation. But I think the reality is we knew the division was going to be a lot stronger this year. Last year was a bit of a freak in the Watfords and the Norwiches that came down didn't make use of their parachute payments. They sold a couple of good players. And this year we've added on to that Southampton and Leeds and Leicester. And then you've got an Ipswich who's just flying through up the division. So there's so many more teams fighting for 3 2+1 places. And ultimately, with the form that we've had, where we have become predictable, we've become a bit stale, despite the fact we're probably hitting 65, 70% possession, creating 20 chances a game. The problem is we're not converting them into goals, because no matter how many good balls in the box or how many intelligent passes, the kind of football brains that Clark and Roberts and the Pritchards have, there isn't that instinctive striker knowing exactly where to stand in the box and stick it away. So we're not getting... we're being over-reliant on goals from midfield and defence, and that will not get you up, unfortunately, or it certainly won't win you enough games.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess I'm really curious to ask you, John, about what the club needs from this next appointment. It seems like the club's going to go a little bit left field. Julien Sabler, who's coach, an assistant at Nice, never been a number one before, has been quite heavily linked. Stephen Schumacher at Plymouth Argyle has a bit more in terms of a proven track record as a number one. There's also Will Still at Reims, who's supposedly an incredibly talented young manager. Is there part of you that's excited at the sort of the potential of some of the coaches that are being linked?
Yeah, I mean, my biggest frustration when managerial vacancies happen is that the bookies just throw a lot of the same old names out there. I mean, when I was a kid, the Sky Sports News would forever have Alan Kirbishley on his cream leather sofa, asking him if he's going to come out of retirement after 5 years out of a job. And, the same names go around, and you're seeing the same names come up again, the Danny Cowleys of this world, and those people
you're not going to go for one of those like a Liam Richardson.
I think where you hit a point earlier in that they are looking at, a different kind of mold of manager now. And I do think certainly given the scouting of players in France and Belgium that we've brought in, it would align to them actually knowing a lot about those leagues, about the managers operating in those leagues. So the likes of Sambo and Will Still really interests me. Actually, I watched. I wouldn't say I'm a fan of Jake Humphries, but I've watched a little bit of his podcast with Will Still, and it is quite fascinating, the actual personality of him and actually what he's done. The frightening thing is he's so young. His experience doesn't come from playing at an elite level, but what he's achieving in France is outstanding, and he's actually a very switched on manager. And if you listen to him speak, it's like listening to our director of football, Christian Speakman, but in a less cheesy way. There's a lot of business talk, there's a lot of buzz phrases, but he kind of says it in a less glamorous and pretentious way, and he's a very thoughtful individual. And I think that that's the sort of person that Kirill Louis-Dreyfus, the chairman and owner, and Christian Speakman are going to be, to use one of their phrases, aligned to, because he's using their phraseology. And I think he is I don't want to say he's a long-term option, because the club have a long-term vision, but the role that they have with a director of football and then a head coach sitting underneath means that role is always fluid. And Tony Mowbray himself admitted that, he won't take much insult from being quickly pushed out, because that's how he quickly got brought in. He understands the game. He's been around the block. So I do think they'll go young. They could go for someone like Still, who is bilingual. He'll align himself well to the young French players in the squad, which we have an abundance of. And
Kim Hellberg as well. Kim Hellberg at IFK Varnamo as well is supposed to be very highly rated. He got them to 5th in the 2023 Alksven. I may have buggered the pronunciation of the Swedish top flight, but that's what it is. And they're historically a sort of lower league club, so he seems to be quite highly rated as well. There's, by the way, I'd recommend Jack Hancock at Hancock Analysis has written a really interesting feature on him. So Kim Hellberg, so that will be worth a read. But I think it's an exciting time. John, in terms of the squad at Sunderland, just before I did bring Dan in from Millwall, would you say there's sort of 5 or 6 sort of top end championship performers that you've got there, and maybe another 4 or 5 positions that you've got to try and figure out a little bit?
I think with our best 11 on the day, we're pretty good, but we are missing a spine. We're missing, ironically, the player we got rid of, Danny Bart, who went for various reasons. I think cost-cutting exercises due to appearance, money if he played another game. So he went. We're really missing him at the back. We're missing Corey Evans, who's our holder midfielder. He's due back in the new year. We haven't had him for a year. And we're missing that kind of experienced, proven championship 20-goal a season striker. You get that, and I think the rest of it is okay. We have had our injuries, but every team has injuries, so I'm not going to dwell on that. But I'd say we have got a few of the best players in the division, and the reason we're not right up there at the moment is because we're lacking that experience and that spine. And if we can just get the right mixture, we'll be all right. Will we bring them in January? Probably not. You'd have to probably breach the model to do it, or spend money on a good young player. And the reason we never really invested after Ross Stewart going is that good strikers are your most expensive asset. They cost money, and the club at the moment are trying to flex in financial fair play. They're trying to make us a sustainable club, which is all admirable.
You kind of, after what's gone before, you kind of
100%. We don't want the Ellis Short just signing checks blindly every week and burning the club into the ground. But at the same time, in January, if certain experienced players aren't back and ready, we're crying out for them, because you can have all the best young players in the world, but they all need leaders around them. Even the class of 92 back in the day had a spine of leaders around them to guide them up to the level they needed to be. So order day for me is, don't mind a good young progressive hipster manager coming in, bilingual, whatever. But I think if he's got a backbone, whoever he or she comes in, then they need to be prepared to have serious conversations with the board around having that blend of experience.
Absolutely. John, thanks so much for joining us. Love the Wise Men Say podcast. So thanks for talking to us, and hopefully catch up with you later in the season, mate.
No problem. All the best, mate.
Cheers. I'm delighted to introduce our next guest, which is Dan Sexton, a Millwall supporter. How are you, Dan?
Very good, mate. Very good. How are you?
Yeah, really well, thanks. Just wondering how you're feeling about the change of style at Millwall under Joe Edwards.
It's still quite hard to judge at this point, to be completely honest. I mean, we had Sheffield Wednesday as our first game, which it wasn't really a huge test. Wednesday didn't play that well on the day, and I think we did play quite well. And then after that, we've had some very tough fixtures. We've had Coventry at the Den. We're not performing very well at the Den at the moment. We've been to Ipswich, and the tough fixtures don't let up. We just had Sunderland at the weekend, and then we've got Cardiff and Leicester in our next two games before heading into what's looking like it's going to be a very important festive period for us with some of the fixtures we've got coming up. So it's quite hard to judge early on. Some players are certainly settling into it better, like Brooke Norton-Cuffy, someone who I think has already developed massively under Joe Edwards. But then other players, maybe someone, I think Wes Harding's done quite well as well, actually. But then someone like Zian Fleming hasn't hit top form yet under Joe Edwards.
Interesting, because that was one of the that appointment gave me a lot of confidence that Zian Fleming might be able to recapture his 22-23 form, because you've got a more progressive style of play, and theoretically you're getting the ball into those sorts of areas more often, and he might have more opportunities to show what he can do, as opposed to the ball going over his head a bit more.
Yeah, I don't really know what to put it down to with Fleming, to be honest. I think he's been taken off in the last three games around the 70th minute, which is something that never would have happened under Gary Rowett. Even no matter how bad he was playing, Rowett would have kept him on, because he's a player that can sometimes just produce a moment of magic when you need it. So it's been interesting that Edwards has actually done it. And, in a way, I tip my hat to the bloke for doing it, because, as I said, I don't think it would have happened under Rowett. But when we've got players like Duncan Watmore, who's just returning from injury, Romain Esse, who's so highly rated by the club and the fans, Fleming needs to start putting out his A game. Otherwise, he might be spending 70 minutes of a game on a bench rather than 70 minutes on the pitch.
Yeah, it's you do kind of feel like the club maybe regret setting the price tag so high for him in the summer. I want to talk to you about Jake Cooper, because he's played under managers, Dan, like Neil Harris, like Gary Rowett, who played quite a sort of long ball style of football, quite well, in Rowett's case, probably quite defensive. Certainly neither of them were possession-based coaches. And yet, under Joe Edwards, we've seen him play some lovely sort of diagonals to the flank. Do you think that's a new thing that we're seeing with Jake Cooper, or something that's inspired by the quality of coaching? Or do you think that was something you always saw in him under previous managers, just maybe wasn't quite unlocked in the same way?
A little bit. When Rowett first came into the club, we actually saw quite a lot of him driving the ball out, almost them kind of overlapping centre backs that Sheffield United deployed the season they got promoted. We saw a lot of that actually from Jake Cooper, which was really interesting. And then the longer Rowett's tenure went on, kind of the more defensive minded he became, and that freedom kind of got taken away from Cooper. We've seen it come back a little bit at the moment. I think he's a little bit underrated with the ball, but I do also think his ability with the ball is probably the reason why he's no disrespect to Millwall, obviously they're my team, but why he's still at Millwall and maybe not one of the bigger hitters in this division, because people don't expect someone with who's 6'5" to be brilliant with the ball. And he's not brilliant, but I think he's developing well under Joe Edwards. As you said, some of his passes, usually the long diagonals that he's looking for the striker, now he's taking a bit more time over, seeing if he can switch the play out to the winger, who on Saturday was Brooke Norton-Cuffy, and that was a switch that worked quite a few times and allows Cuffy to do what he does best in terms of running at the defence, being fearless. And it's not where our assist came from, but that happened a lot of the time and managed to open up the play quite a lot, which was beneficial because it's something we don't usually see too often.
For sure. So January is going to be Edwards' first transfer window. Just wondering, where do you think you're going to need to strengthen? And do you think the recruitment will be done with a view to possibly building a team that can challenge next season, as opposed to too much, if you bring in sort of 4 loans in January, how much good is that going to do if you're probably going to be in the Championship again next season?
I think the club are going to be looking to loans. That's what Joe Edwards seemed to hint at. When he did his post-match interview after the Sunderland game, he said it looks like we're going to be looking into the loan market, which, I mean, he's got great contacts with being in the England youth setup, being at Chelsea, their loan manager for such a long time, same with Andy Myers, and he's also been at Everton. So I have no doubt he's got good contacts, and I think he could be able to get some good players for us. But I think the squad is in need of a massive overhaul in terms of, like you say there perfectly with Jake Cooper. He's been here under Neil Harris. He's been here under Gary Rowett. There has to be a time where, no matter how good some of these players have been, there at times, I look at Murray Wallace as this is a perfect example, being a fantastic club servant for the 6-7 years he's been at the club, but he's now not playing very well. Against Ipswich, had a very, very poor game. I know it's probably a bit harsh to single him out in that one, but that's not the first poor performance we've seen from him this season.
Sure.
So in terms of the question, what positions I'd be looking at, I'd definitely be looking to strengthen at left back, because playing Murray Wallace just isn't beneficial for the team. And I think that kind of played in the selection process on Saturday when we saw George Honeyman play on the left-hand side to give him that extra defensive support on that side. I'd also look to sign a winger, because we don't really have many natural wingers at the club. I mean, Norton Cuffy's been playing on the right, but he came in as a wing back, and now we're not playing that system. He's definitely a better right midfielder than a right back. But on the left, it's been between Ryan Longman and George Honeyman in particular, with some cameos for Idemaya Maku and a little bit with Duncan Watmore as well. So I think a winger, probably someone who's a little bit more comfortable on the left, would be ideal. I think there's an argument to possibly made for a striker and centre half as well, but we only have 3 loan slots open, I believe, at the moment.
And probably not much scope to sign players for transfer fees in January, because that's always difficult, isn't it?
Yeah, we splashed out a bit, and by Millwall standards, we splashed out in the summer. I think we spent just over £5 million on players, which is, I know it's not, doesn't sound big money, but for Millwall, that is a huge amount of money to be spending in one summer. So, I mean, one player we brought in who hasn't really kicked a ball much, was struggling for minutes under Rowett, that's continued under Edwards, is Alan Campbell. Wonder if he might be sent back, and the club might look to use that loan slot elsewhere. I think a number of Millwall fans are keen to see either a centre half or a striker come into the team to help out as well.
That makes a lot of sense. Well, Dan, hopefully Joe Edwards can continue to oversee this stylistic evolution at the Den. Thanks for talking to us, and hopefully catch up with you later in the season.
Sounds good, Gab. Thank you very much for having me on, mate.
Cheers, Dan. Much appreciated. I'm delighted to bring in our next guest, which is Rori from the Every Step Along the Way podcast on Stoke City and the Booth and Rawcast. How are you?
I'm okay, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, really well, thanks. Really appreciate you joining us. Just wondering how you feel, how the season's going for Stoke City.
We started off with a pretty good run, I'd say. Obviously, we faced, your Rotherhams. We had Rotherham twice, which we flew 10 goals past.
You can't play them every week, that's the thing.
No, yeah, definitely. And then obviously we had Ipswich, and we lost 2-0. And then obviously we beat Watford, and then lost to Millwall because we were playing okay at home, but the minute we turned back at an away game, it was just, I can't even describe it, to be honest. It was like, well, we've got this team, so why aren't we doing as well as we should be? And we all put it down to, well, the team needs to gel. We've got a lot of international players who have come in. Obviously, some of them don't speak English. So it was getting them to introduce all 17 of them, which we signed.
Yeah.
Obviously, well, it was 18, but obviously Chiquinho went back. And then coming into September, we lost to Preston at home, drew to Huddersfield away, lost to Hull at home, and then we beat Bristol 3-2, which obviously with Nathan Lowe scoring as well in the last minutes was that sort of where we went on a bit of an up. And then obviously we lost to Southampton, lost to Leicester, and then we had 4 games unbeaten, and a clean sheet run. Obviously, we lost Mark Travers, which he still hasn't been played yet for Bournemouth. So it's quite annoying that we've lost him, and then we've had to then bring Tommy Simpkin back from his loan.
He did very well at Solihull Moors in the National League.
He did. He was doing really well, but because Frank Fielding got injured, we've had to bring him back, and guaranteed he's only going to just sit on the bench again anyway. Which I suppose Solihull Moors are going to be feeling the pain we've had to then feel of bringing Jack Bonham in. He was doing so well, and then we lost 4-2 to QPR and 3-0 to Blackburn. It's like, where's this good run gone?
Yeah, for sure. I suppose what I noticed from the extended highlights of the game at Plymouth Argyle, obviously lost that one late on, which was a bit of a gut wrencher. Your best chances came in transition, where you had certainly Tyrese Campbell looked like a bit of a threat. Do you think that's how Alex Neil wants to play, high pressing team with and cuts teams open quickly?
I think Alex Neil definitely. I mean, he's on his last chances at the club. Obviously, not everybody. Obviously, for fans, he's on his last chance. Obviously, but we don't know what the board wants. But a lot of the fans are like, no, we want him gone. But again, obviously, he does like to cut teams open straight away because I mean, it's going all the way back to August. But if you look at Ipswich, we were losing 2-0 quite quickly, and Alex Neil brought all the rubbish players off within 20 minutes and swapped them. But I think he cuts teams open, even if he scores, in a sense of if we concede one, we lose a head straight away if we concede first. But in a sense of if we score first, then we've sort of, if we do concede, we've got our goal to sort of like, okay, we've got a draw, there's still a point available. And then it's just sort of going from there and trying to be the better side, which I do feel like we were still against Plymouth, but it was just to luck that we lost the game to the goal.
Yeah. Well, let's bring in Mike, who's managed to make it home after being stuck in traffic. So thanks for joining us, Mike. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, mate. Thanks. How are you?
Yeah, great to have you on. We're just talking about the Alex Neil situation, I suppose. Rory was saying there that a lot of Stoke fans are keen for a change of manager. What's your feeling on the situation?
You're right. We did a little poll actually. It's about 2 hours left to go, and I think just under 1,000 people have voted, and I swear 59% wanted him out. A few people were undecided. I'd say the vast majority are on that side. I mean, I know me personally, I almost feel down the middle at this point. I think the thing for me, guys, right? It's easy to say get rid of Alex Neil, right? That's the easy thing to do. My problem is we've let him go and sign 17, 18 players, and who are you going to bring in? The person you're going to bring in, you've got to deem as someone who's going to be able to basically improve you. Now, I don't want to hear the name Graham Potter. People need to get real. As Dan said on the podcast, he's turned down top European clubs. Why would he be holding out for Stoke City? The answer is he wouldn't. So you then question who's available. And for me, if I'm honest with you, mate, there's very few players who are actually suitable in my eyes right now.
Rory, I think it's an interesting point that Mike's made there. At the same time, he's had I think it's over a year in charge now. Would you have wanted to have seen more from his work, even sort of acknowledging that it was a massive overhaul of the squad in the summer?
Yeah, I mean, he's brought in everyone, give him the benefit of the doubt. Last half of the season, last season, and like, well, let him bring in his own players, give him the summer transfer window, and see where he sits with them. And to be honest, at first it was all, well, let them gel. And I thought he'd be able to do more with a team of such high talent. You know, you've got Vidigal, you've got Bejon Ho, Haskabanovic, you've got all these players which are sitting, and you're thinking, well, with a manager like Alex Neil, who went on the run he did with Sunderland, why aren't we performing with a manager of such high talent.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. Mike, what do you feel has been a little bit amiss, and do you think it is just a case of all these new players bedding in, a bit like we discussed possibly on the podcast when I came on every step along the way in the summer, where you're bringing in sort of close to 20 players, and maybe it's difficult for them to find that synergy straight away?
I think there's definitely an element of that, mate. I mean, how many of these players have actually ever played in the Championship? Come from the Korean League and stuff like that. I mean, they don't understand what the Championship's all about. There's only a few people, the Michael Rose of this world, who are no world beaters, who have actually got experience in the league. So there's 100% going to be an element of that. And I do agree with what Rory was saying around you would expect better. And I think for Alex Neil to save his job and give him a chance next season, he's got to finish above 16th. And my concern, talk about that style of play and things like that as well, Gabs. I mean, my concern here is that any team who comes and puts, two banks of four behind us, we cannot break them down. And I'm actually a little bit concerned about Sheffield Wednesday this weekend. They've started to pick up a few results, and they are a team
playing really well. We were just talking to a Wednesday out on the podcast earlier, and they were saying although they haven't quite got brilliant results under Röhl, it's not like a stark turnaround on paper, but actually performance-wise, they've been pretty close. So you do wonder whether it might be a bit of a banana skin.
I think if we lose this, you will see the 365 get poisonous. And I think, because if you look at the games that we haven't won recently, 6 or 7 of them, you turn around and go, you've got to get 15 points out of that. And we might end up coming out of this with 3. And that you can't, there's been some goodwill, and he's had a lot of time, in a lot of people's opinions, to make these players work. And if he goes on this continual run of not winning games and not picking up points, the stadium will turn at the weekend, and it's going to take a very brave owner not to react to that. So it's a really weird time. I don't want him to go. I think there's a good manager in there, but something isn't quite clicking, and I'm not quite sure what it is, if I'm honest.
Well, we'll have to wait and see on that one. Listen, thanks so much for joining us, Rori, Mike. Really appreciate your time. Go check out the Every Step Along the Way podcast, and also check out the Booth and Rawcast. This has been EFL Debate, the Championship podcast. Thanks to you for watching at home, and we'll see you again next week.